In this segment, Stephanie Miller is joined by a former FBI agent to discuss what is driving the spike in gun violence across America. Stephanie?
It's been, let's be honest, a depressing weekend, and I'm sure, at the FBI, this is what you're afraid of. They just found the gunman in Maine dead. Friday, there was two other, I guess they weren't mass shootings, but in Tampa and Chicago over the weekend. Do you worry about copycat stuff as much as I do when this happens?
There's no question that, it's a valid concern. It's not just kind of this unfounded anxiety. We do know that people do mimic mass shooters, spree shooters, and it gets into this catch-22. You've got to publicize this. There's public safety issues. You've got to update the public, but at the same time, every time you do that, you may be planting the seed in somebody's misguided brain that this is something that gets you famous. And so I cringe whenever I hear the name of a shooter repeated. I think we should be calling them the murderer instead. But yet, when someone's on the run or you can't find them, you do have to show the photo. You do have to mention the name because we've got to capture the individual before he kills again.
Yeah. And Frank, it's just, you tweeted, a well-regulated militia committed to a mental facility for 2 weeks after hearing voices and threatening to shoot up a base. I mean, this is one of those things where you're like, wow, there were beyond red flags, right? His family, his coworkers, the people at the base. Police across Maine were just alerted last month to veiled threats by the U.S. Army reservists who would go on to carry out the worst mass shooting in the state's history, one of a string of missed red flags that preceded the massacre. Apparently, they went to his house at one point and, he wasn't home. So that's it. They were afraid he was going to snap and commit a mass shooting and they just, how does that happen, Frank?
Yeah. So, it's funny, yet not funny. I kind of have an automatic file that I download in my brain when I'm going on the air with a mass shooting. And I take time, for example, to talk about the warning signs and indicators. And I almost started doing that when this happened last week. And then I stopped myself, of course, because we don't need to educate the public on warning signs and indicators. In this particular case, they were all there. So what we have to do now with this investigation is focus on the gaps and what fell through those cracks and gaps and fix it. Because I'm not certain yet that existing rules, policies, and laws were followed. So I know we hear calls for, let's pass a new law. Well, wait a minute. I think maybe existing rules weren't followed here. And one of the gaps that I think is easily fixed, but let's get into the weeds and see what happens as we move forward. But this guy went to training for the Army Reserves. He's from Maine, but he went to training at West Point in New York. And that's where his superiors committed him for 2 weeks because of a real concern for his own safety and others. So here comes the New York State troopers to transport him to the military hospital in New York. What it seems didn't happen, and we need to flesh this out, is that New York never entered him in their own red flag system, nor did they go to Maine and said, this guy has a problem and likely shouldn't have weapons. So what's the gap? The gap seems to be military. We've seen this gap before, by the way, a few years back in Texas. A church shooting where the Air Force never entered their guy into the NICS system, National Instant Check System. In this case, I don't think that happened. I don't think there was any. You heard the police and public safety commissioner in Maine at a press conference say, we didn't, almost with kind of sarcasm, we can't find any evidence of involuntary commitment. So why do I say that's easily fixed? The president is the commander in chief of the military, right? He doesn't have to pass a law to order the military to enter the goddamn threat into the system and share it with superiors at the guy's base in Maine and put it in the system and take action.
Yeah, despite earlier threats, the FBI said Card had not been on its radar, saying it did not have or did not receive any tips or information concerning Robert Card. The Bureau added its instant background check system was not provided with or in possession of any information that would prohibit him from lawful firearm purchase. So let's talk to me for a minute about it. It says, while Maine does not have a red flag law, it has a more limited yellow flag law that would still allow police to petition a judge to take a person's firearm away if a medical practitioner deemed him to be a threat. But as you say, none of this worked, right?
Exactly. So I'm not a huge fan of the so-called yellow flag law. I get that Maine is a big hunting state, so they want to take a
Yeah.
softer approach to ever taking someone's weapons away. I totally get that. But why I don't like yellow flag is because what Maine does is they insert a third party in this picture. That's a mental health or medical professional who has to sign off on taking the weapon.
Yeah.
I don't like any insertion of any more time or parties between threat and addressing the threat. Let the police, what red flag laws do in other
Yeah.
states is let the police look at the threat, talk to the family, let the family or police petition a court to quickly take the weapons temporarily with due process.
Yeah.
But here, no, let's insert a medical professional, try to find one in the middle of the night. It's unwieldy. It doesn't seem to work.
Yeah.
And again, it's garbage in, garbage out. If you can't enter it in the system, you forget, as New York may have forgotten, I don't know, then nobody has anything to go on.
One thing I did want to ask you, Frank, is one expert was quoted here saying just because there appears to be a mental health nexus to the scenario, the vast majority of people with mental health diagnosis will never hurt anybody. And interestingly, I got a tweet from a listener of ours who said, Steph, as the mother of a son who has a mental health condition, it pains me when you shout mentally ill as an accusation in your description of the killer in Maine. That crushes the hearts of the mentally ill and their families who battle stigma every day. That obviously is true. So yet we're at 565 mass shootings this year, and it's still only October. So,
Right.
she makes a good point, and so does this expert, that of course the vast majority, will never hurt anybody. But obviously there are enough dangerous mentally ill people that we are literally probably will hit 600 mass shootings this year. So
Exactly, and everything that your writer said is true. And I'm guilty of this sometimes. I try very hard when I'm on the air to say violently mentally ill or evidence of a mental illness with violent ideology. That's the real distinction here. And so that's true. It's also incredibly true that we have a great disparity between the percentage of mental illness in this country and the number of professionals who can actually address it. If you've ever had a friend or loved one that needed help in a hurry and you've tried to get an appointment with a mental health professional, good luck. It's a real problem. And so there's a solution to that. Guess what? After the Virginia Tech shooting, we did add this mental health flag into the NICS system, the instant check system. But it's again, garbage in, garbage out. There's a way to handle this. We're just not using the existing mechanisms to do it.
President Biden called on Republicans in Congress, good luck, to help keep Americans safe from gun violence, praised police for their work. Here's one headline that depressed me, Frank. I just want to get your take on it. We're seeing fear. Maine killings prompt a huge spike in gun purchases. Several of the area's gun dealers, this is in Maine, were open for business Thursday, the day after the shootings, when the suspected gunman was still at large, while nearly all other businesses abided by shelter-in-place order advising residents to stay off the streets. Some gun stores answered spiking interest in gun ownership by opening their doors. They've since reported abnormally high sales of all types of firearms. One store said they typically sell about 20 firearms a day. They've been selling 5 times that many since Thursday. Every third purchase is an AR-15. I mean, it just feels like this endless cycle of gun violence is never going to end some days. What do you think? I mean, what do you make of that?
Well, I've seen those same reports. I also see the irony in this, right? We've got a hellacious gun problem. We've got mass and spree shooters. This guy was both a mass and spree shooter. And so what's the answer? More guns, please. Now, I have to say, I understand. I do understand. If you live in the very rural state of Maine, the response time out in the boondocks, right, in the woods and forest country, is going to be very lengthy. If you're in trouble, I understand the need to want a gun. I got it, to defend your family. But this is illustrative of why it's even more important for Maine to get with the program and to allow family and law enforcement to quickly hold someone's weapons when they see an articulated violent threat. I get it. And by the way, this also creates, if you want to get into the economics of the gun business,
Yeah.
doesn't this, they know that gun sales are going to go up after a mass shooting. They know it. For two reasons. People are going to want to protect themselves, understandably, and they also push, the NRA and gun shops push, oh, and now they're going to come get your guns because, here it is again, they're going to take them, so you better get them now. So here we are.
And Frank, we've talked about this before, but I feel like there is a timidity in the mainstream media to call this out for what it is, that this main shooter, like 90-something% of these shooters, is a right-winger, is a white guy right-winger, who retweeted every MAGA account, including Don Jr. We just had Joe from Syracuse wrote and said Fox, he watched Fox all Friday night, didn't even cover it, that the gunman was found dead. He said, was it because Robert Card was one of their own? He was white, he was right-wing, he murdered people in cold blood, young families in rural Maine. Do they not want to share this info with Fox News viewers, especially in Maine? I watched during the 10 o'clock hour, half the 11 o'clock, nothing on Fox. They were all broadcasting live. I mean, and of course, the answer is of course. If it were a brown person, they'd be covering it 24/7. But I just feel like there's a timidity in the media in general to talk about the ideology of a lot of these shooters.
There is, and I will tell you. So first, with regard to platforms like Fox, the truth hurts, and they don't want to put that out. And I've seen reports also that the shooter, some of his most downloaded or reposted material was Elon Musk material.
Yep.
That's interesting. Here's my thinking on this. I think the media looks at this and says, okay, it's mental illness, and so therefore, if we even imply that this guy was driven by MAGA ideology, it won't stand up because he's mentally ill. I say this. I've had conversations with folks with regard to the ability of MAGA folks and Donald Trump to incite violence, and what they push back on me with is, well, you can't account for mental illness. So freedom of speech allows us to say whatever we want, and we shouldn't have to think through carefully how crazy people are going to respond to what I say. I say no, au contraire, because we have a track record now of mentally ill people responding to what you say with violence. Over and over and over again. Buffalo supermarket shooter.
The Muslim boy that was stabbed, the Palestinian boy that was stabbed to death in Chicago.
El Paso Walmart kid who shot up the Walmart responded to all the right-wing brown invasion theory. The church in the black church, AME church in Carolina, say all the same. You're not making stuff up when you say, yes, mentally ill people are incited to violence by MAGA ideology. So yes, you should be thinking through those consequences when you say crazy things.